Thank you for hitting play. I'm your host, Timothy Kimo Bryan, and I bring my experience with podcasting since 2006 as a listener and a podcaster. I'm here to help you outsmart the algorithm and find your next binge-worthy podcast. Here's how the show works. I comb through the millions of podcasts currently available for free on many different platforms, and then I come back to you with what I've found. Sure, you can use search engines for recommendations from most podcast apps, but you know what? I feel that getting a personal recommendation from a real, live, breathing person is the best way to find these gems that are out there. I know that's how I find them. The show is broken up into 3 halves. I'm a huge fan of Car Talk, so bear with me. If you don't know Car Talk, then you need to go ahead and Google that because it's one of my favorite radio shows out there. Now, the first half is the stats of the show being reviewed. This gives you all the details about where to find the show, how many episodes, who's hosting the show. Basically, that first half is just for the folks that want the stats. That's all they care about. Now, the second half of the show is where I dig a bit deeper into the show and letting you know how well the hosts interact, talk about their audio quality, and let you know what the show is about, essentially. Now, the last half of the show is where I talk about why the show is binge-worthy, where to start your journey with the show being reviewed. And a lot of times I'll be reaching out to the hosts so that way they can discuss their show and talk about their podcast journey. So what are we waiting for? Let's get going. So I'd like to start off this episode by saying thank you to those of you that have been here since the start. Now, this episode was really hard for me emotionally, and there was a lot of things going on in my life to get this episode knocked out and to be where it is right now. Now, for those of you that are new, welcome aboard. I usually don't start off apologizing for an episode, but the faithful folks that have found me know that I like to churn these out once a month, sometimes twice a month if I'm feeling really squirrely. Now, I've added a few podcasts that I run both at work and at home, so I'm getting used to handling the new tasks in my schedule, as well as kind of the emotional nature of this episode in particular. So let's get these stats knocked out for us. Now, Love and Radio has been a beacon for me. It shows me where someone can go in terms of podcasting and making it artistically relevant today. Now, I've been a fan of this podcast since 2017 when I found it, and there have been some ups and downs with this podcast. But overall, Love and Radio is a solid pick for podcasts that are really learning the art of sound design. We're going to knock out these stats, though, for you. So the website is loveandradio.org. That's no plus sign. That's the actual word and in there for you. The host is Nick Vander Kolk. Episodes at the time of this recording was 117 when I first started recording this and doing the review for it. There's been a couple since then, but that's okay. Average length is about 33 minutes, so this comes in at a pretty good time for most people. And the first one published was way back in the day, 18 October of 2010. 2010, can you make it? Wow, that's been a while. The description in Apple Podcasts that Nick uses is Nick Vanderkolk's Love and Radio features in-depth, otherworldly-produced interviews with an eclectic range of subjects, from the seedy to the sublime. Get inside the mind of a rogue taxidermist. Find out what it's like to experience a stroke firsthand, or spend time with an artist who gives away her life savings every night. You've never heard anything like this before. Now, I'm going to stop right there and just kind of go, I see a lot of podcasts doing this. You've never heard anything like this before. This is one of those podcasts where you have not heard anything like this before. This is going off the deep end sometimes. This is going into strange areas. Again, we'll talk a little bit later on in the show about why it took me so long to do this episode. because of one of the episodes of Love and Radio, which we'll talk about. But yeah, if you've heard this phrase before, oh, you never heard anything like this before, you really haven't heard anything like this before. Okay, I'm going to vouch for that. The genre for this one is arts, society, and culture. So I know that one very well. The frequency of it is episodic. He pretty much churns it out when he's going to churn out an episode. So there'll be stretches where he'll boom, 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 knock out episodes left and right. And then there'll be dry stretches for a while. And I think that's okay because it adds that sense of when's the next one going to come out? What's he going to talk about next? What is there to talk about next? So, and you don't want to miss out on it. So it's the whole fear of missing out. So I think he's got that down to a T, where it's not every Tuesday at 4 a.m. We'll have a new episode out. It's when they're done. They're done. And he puts them out. And I think that's a great way to do it. In the show notes, I do have all these links in the show notes, but you can email him, contact@loveandradio.org. He does have a Facebook page, Twitter, and X. Twitter and X is the same thing now. Instagram page. In the show notes, I do put the Podchaser link there for you, and Listen Notes. Listen Notes rates him at a top 0.05%. Now, again, I need to put in my disclaimer about Listen Notes, and I get this disclaimer from Dave Jackson from School of Podcasting with Dave Jackson. So with Listen Notes, they are pretty much rating everybody that listens to them on their app. Is their big brouhaha. So take it with a grain of salt. I mean, I can honestly see this being a top 0.05% podcast, but that would mean it would have to be on everybody's lips, and it's not. So if you've never heard of this podcast, that just goes and proves my point. If it's truly a top 0.05%, then we're talking about on the level of Joe Rogan. Not everybody's talking about this podcast on the level of Joe Rogan. So, Listen Notes, I'm going to keep you as part of the show here, just as a reference, but I'm always going to do the disclaimer with Listen Notes to let you know, take what they say with a grain of salt. I also have a link there for you in Good Pods. So Good Pods is a great app that you can listen to podcasts on and contribute directly to the host. And you can comment on each episode of the podcast that you're listening to, the podcast that you're following. And you can join other groups of people in Good Pods. And that's going to sound like a Good Pods commercial. I apologize, but you can do that. So in Good Pods. So give that one a shot for yourself. Now, this podcast sometimes has interviews, and sometimes it has non-hosted interviews. And what do I mean by that? Well, that's where the guest is reacting to questions posed by the host, but you don't get to hear those questions. So it's really hard to call this a purely interview podcast. I think he does a lot of interviews. Most of the episodes, a good chunk of the episodes are interviews, whether they're Nick doing the interview or somebody else doing the interview for Nick, or whether they're hostless interviews where the guest is reacting to the questions and all you're hearing is the reaction to the questions and not the actual questions themselves. I guess that would be more of a narrative interview. You could call it that, or a hostless interview. We're going to call it a hostless interview. So here's the thing. Some of the episodes are just stories dragged from the headlines of the papers that we don't usually read. That's where they come from. Nick finds it somewhere out there in the universe, and he brings it back to his show. For me, I think the main attraction is how you can change your format and have a long and impactful career in podcasting. Now, I've seen him do his show live in a theater during Richmond, Virginia's Resonate Podcast Festival in 2022. And I got to say, seeing Nick do his show in person is really a whole other level of enjoyment. If you get a chance to see him do his show in person, with Love and Radio, or he has another show out there called Secrets. Definitely make it a point to go see him in person, because that just adds another dimension to the show. And the show that I saw, basically the head of the theater department, which I'm a graduate of VCU's theater department. The head of the theater department there went and took a baseball bat to a paper mache sculpture that was based on a sculpture done by one of the great surrealists of our time, and not Pablo Picasso. Who am I thinking of? It'll come to me later. But yeah, she just took a baseball bat to it, and it was a fantastic thing. So definitely check out the live show if you can. If you can't, that's fine. I think you're going to get a lot of good stuff with the just audio only. And if Nick is listening, do a video podcast. Do a video episode. That would be cool to see. But yeah. This is a good one. I'm geeking out about this one. So there you go. Peanut butter. Yeah, you heard me right. Peanut butter. Can it change your life? Well, only if it's Sprelly peanut butter. My family and I have been enjoying this brand of peanut butter for almost 10 years now. The staff has become part of our family, and in some small ways, we've become part of theirs. So why peanut butter? Well, this stuff is gourmet peanut butter. Oh, yeah. Gourmet. Not fooling around with you here. They also have jellies that are paired to perfection with their peanut butters. And they do a ton of community work here in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Support your local business by heading over to Sprelly.com and grabbing some great peanut butters and jellies. You'll thank me later. Our family's favorite is Cinnamon Toast Crunch, and my personal favorite is the Butterscotch, which tastes just like a Butterfinger to me. So get some Sprelly in your belly. Get some Sprelly in that belly. Now shipping all over the U.S. Sprelly. It's good for your belly. So, as I said earlier in the show here, I've been enjoying this podcast since about 2017, and I wanted to bring it forward to you, fellow travelers, because it's one of the most unique shows I've encountered that is both artistic and palatable to the general audience. Now, the show is not the perfect show. Hitting all of my arbitrary ideas on what I like to see in a podcast is tough enough to do. But this podcast, Love and Radio, it hits a lot of the things that I look for in a podcast, and it misses some of the things that I look for in a really good podcast. But let's think right now. As I'm recording this, it's 2023. This podcast has been going on since 2010. I think Nick knows what he's doing. Call me crazy, but I think Nick knows what he's doing. So, whatever I think makes a great podcast, he's doing some of those things, but then he's going off and doing his own kind of thing as well. So I think that's a wonderful thing with this podcast. Now I'm going to start this half of the show off in a bit of a different way this time. And I want to tell you why it took me so long to get this episode out. I think it's really important and really germane to the topic here. The reason why it took me a while to produce the episode, one of the reasons is a personal reason. But that personal reason is why this podcast makes me feel more than most podcasts do. The episode was titled A Red Dot, and it had a warning at the beginning. So take a listen.
Sometimes we take content warnings on this show lightly. This is not a case of that. This episode has stuff in it that may be triggering for some people, so please, tread carefully. And if you have kids listening, I strongly advise you to skip this one.
Okay, so for me, I'm not one for trigger warnings, but this one I should have paid way more attention to. Basically, this episode is from the viewpoint of a sexual abuser. The host Doesn't give the guest an easy way out, and the guest does supply some convincing arguments about the poor treatment of sexual predators in our society and the criminal justice system. Now, as a victim of sexual abuse, this episode was a tough one for me to get through. I had heard it when it originally came out, and when I was choosing the episodes to review for this show, Red Dot, which is the title of the show, appeared on my radar. Now, I knew it was going to be a tough one to review, but I knew I needed to express to you, dear traveler, how this affected me. I was angry, repulsed, crying, and interacting with the show throughout the entire episode. It caused me physical and emotional pain to listen to this. But I knew I had to, when it originally came out, to do this, to review this episode for this review. Now, I'm not angry at Nick for this interview. It is needed. This is not the type of story that's going to be heard in most modern mainstream media. Nick and his fellow interviewer, again, did not let the guest off easily. Listening to it again, for me, was cathartic. Got a lot of emotions settled that had been piling up a while. And I was able to express those, and I'm able to express them now here with you. But this is just one of the reasons why, I really like the show, because it causes that reaction in me when I listen to the show. Some of the episodes cause that reaction. Now, they don't have to be about sexual abuse, but he covers a lot of different topics that will really get into your soul and really make you think things through, maybe from a different light. Now, this episode, I'm not going to think through it with a different light because I have personal experience with it, and that's just not going to happen for me. But you may hear the episode, this one in particular, and go, "Oh, okay, yeah, I never thought of it like that." I would caution you, don't buy into the sexual abuser's excuses and claims necessarily. But everything that I have followed, everything that I know, sexual predators get a hard time because they're sexual predators and who they target. Anyhow, it's good to hear a different perspective on this. I think hearing different perspectives causes conversations to happen, causes people to sometimes rethink their positions, causes people sometimes to dig in deeper. For me, dig in deeper. But for you, it may be something completely different. So that's why I offer it to you. But just the physical and the emotional reaction that I had to it, I had to include it in this review for sure. Okay, enough about me in this specific episode. Let's get to work on the rest of Love and Radio. Let's begin at the beginning. Usually the episode starts off with an ad or two, depending on the episode. There can be ads in the mid-roll. Now, this podcast for a time was only available on Luminary, which required a subscription. Now, Luminary was trying to become a podcast player that would replace Patreon. The problem with that was initially they were scraping podcasts off of Apple Podcast Directory and charging subscribers to listen to podcasts that were already freely available. For myself, many podcasters, we sent a letter to them an email to them to cease and desist, and that I didn't opt in to be part of this, and I wasn't making any money off of it. Now, I'm not sure if Nick experienced an impact on his listener size when he went exclusively with Luminary for a time. But now he's back out in the public, and he's got a healthy Patreon following, which, I do include that in the show notes. So that way, if you do hear it and you're like, yeah, I do want to support this, then you can go right to his Patreon and support the show. Now, as a rule, I don't review podcasts that I make a financial contribution towards, or, if I make a monthly contribution towards that podcast, I'm going to let you know in the episode. This one I do not contribute to, but I am seriously considering to do a Patreon for this show after this episode gets out into the world. So you may hear some Luminary ads when you listen to these episodes from the website or your podcast player of choice when you're listening to Love and Radio. But that's just the reason why you're hearing those ads, is because he was with Luminary for a while and now he's not. All right, turning our attention now to how he welcomes newcomers. He doesn't. Yeah, you're getting into the show. You're going to hear some ads and then boom, you're right into the show. Now, the usual episode starts off, with ads and then jumps right into it. And later on, you'll get some sort of introduction to the show within 5 to 7 minutes. You probably get a title and a short blurb. I've got 2 clips to show you what I mean about that.
I very, very rarely shave my legs. But when I went to this shoot, it was one of the first times ever that I shaved my legs. It's like a Japanese tea ceremony, You get all your ingredients, you get the soap and the water. I'm standing in the shower. I hook my leg up on the faucet, and I soap my legs up, and I'm thinking I'm in a commercial, I'm trying to do it all sexy. I'm like, ooh. I have my soap in one hand and then my razor, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is great. And when you're done, you have these bare legs and it feels really good, and you rub your legs together and you're like, ooh yeah, this is why people do it.
Let me ask a question. Can we take a break?
Oh my gosh. You should ask at any moment.
Okay. Because this is kind of intense, and so I'd kind of like to have a little tobacco. Would you like a warm up on your coffee, or
I'm good on the coffee.
Let's take a break.
From Radiotopia, you're listening to Love and Radio. I'm Nick Vanderkolk. Today's episode, A Red Dot.
Hi. Hi, my name's Frank, and I'm a registered citizen in the state of California, also known as a sex offender. And I just want to let you know that that's not who I am. That's something I did 35 years ago. It's not who I am today. And so...
Now, these 2 clips were from 2 different episodes. One was from the Red Dot episode, and the other one was from the Dirty Balloons episode. The first one was done at about the 2-minute mark to introduce the episode. The second one was done at the 7-minute mark of the episode. Now, it's as if he's begrudgingly doing this to appease the critics. He has a clear idea of what his audience wants and who they are. But I always go with the feeling that everyone who downloads this show, Find a Podcast About, is a new person. Now, that can get annoying for longtime listeners, but, that's what the fast forward feature is on many podcast apps. What I would say to newcomers at the beginning of the show, I'm not sure, what would I say at the beginning of a show? I don't know. It's not my show. But giving them a glimpse of what to expect is a nice gesture. Now, again, he may not want to do that, and he may want to keep his format because it makes sense to him. It provides tension as to, what's going to be discussed. It doesn't give away too much of what's coming next. But for me, I still think a little extra something in general for new listeners would be great. Or better yet, listen to this podcast, then go and listen to Love and Radio. Now let's look how he stays on the topic at hand. Since you usually don't know what's happening in the first few minutes of the episode, you don't know what to pay attention to and what not to. However, once the episode really gets started, Nick is all about using the found footage or the created footage that he has to make his point in each episode. Once you hit that aha moment in the show, it all makes sense. And then you go, oh, I'm supposed to pay attention to all of this. There's nothing here wasted. Now, sometimes that's at the end, and sometimes it's towards the beginning when you get that aha moment. But always, all the footage that he uses supports the episode. There's totally no waste in it. The focus on his topic is super tight. Now, Nick isn't the only person conducting interviews. When there's a straight interview, I call it a straight interview. That's one-on-one being produced. He has friends or colleagues do the interviews in tandem or totally on their own. Let's listen into a few questions in this clip about what's going on.
So when a slave is like saying you're a goddess and I suck, I'm a worm, I'm a toilet, are you just playing along to some extent when you say like, yeah, you are, or do you really?
No, I do, yeah. They do completely suck. I'm so much smarter than them, so much better than them, and they need to be put in these situations where they are realizing this because they haven't ever been told. Like white men get pat on their back their whole life. It's like a big responsibility as a god to put you in your place and be like, actually, you ain't shit. And I'm here to tell you that. And fear me. And they do fear me, and I feel like I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. Because I think it to be true. Like, I do think I am better than most, if not all, white men.
Now, this clip that you just heard was from an episode on female black doms. The question he and his team usually use are in-depth and cause the interviewees pause before, because there usually aren't asked questions like this from other interviews. I do like it when Nick conducts the interview himself because, yeah, it is his show. But I realize that he's given the spotlight to somebody else, and perhaps they have questions that are more sensitive or empathetic than the one he wants to use, or maybe just a bad day for him to interview. But overall, when the questions are revealed, and some interviews are narrative in nature, so we don't get to hear what they really are. But when we do get to hear what the questions are, I don't have any complaints about how far they go. Nick does go farther than I would in a similar situation, but he's been doing this for a lot longer than I have. He's been doing this type of show for, it's going to be 15 years soon. So I think he knows what he's doing. Now, the sound quality on this, you know me, I love good sound quality. This is on a professional level. And I think this is where Nick and his team really excels at their craft. There are a lot of drones going on in the background that, you know, if you just listen to the music and not the words, these drones seem like they're going to go on for eternity, and they don't bring attention to themselves while somebody is talking, but they add something to the piece. It's kind of like, you know, bass players in a band. Okay. A lot of times you're not going to hear the bass line. Sometimes you will, but a lot of times you're not going to hear it. But the bass player is really keeping the band together when they're on stage, and they're keeping the time, they're keeping the groove going. And, you know, any bass player will tell you that. Of course, my bass is just behind my TV there. It's getting dusty, but, you know, as a bass player, I can tell you that we keep the band going. So, but this music that he puts behind it, underneath it, really gives it a good bed for it to germinate and to get better. It's the same way that people, you know, when they go into the theater, when they do live theater, when they go see a show, they don't critique the lighting design. You know, the audience is there for the action on stage. The lights support that action. And, you know, you shouldn't notice the lighting, you know, at a live theater. That's the art of it. It's so good. It directs you where to look. It takes you on a ride, and you don't even know that it's doing that. My sneaky suspicion is that Nick was a frustrated lighting designer in a past life, just like I had. So anyhow, my overall feeling after each episode is I learned something or listened to a new perspective of something that I may or may not agree with or never been exposed to. Red Dot is a perfect example. This, for me, is well worth the price of admission. You know, I'm entertained by the topic, and most times, if I'm not laughing, I'm going to be upset at the injustice that we're hearing about, or mildly amused by a story that we've heard on his show. Red Dot did supply a lot of emotion for me. Probably it's on my top 10 podcast episodes that triggered an emotional response from me of all time. Maybe number 1 or number 2. For me, this is a mark of a great podcast, in my estimation. If somebody can do an episode like that, and for me to, hey, I'm subscribed to about 150 different podcasts, so I'm listening to a lot of podcasts throughout the week. And if one episode can reach out of all of that noise and really impact me, that says something about the talent that is Nick Vanderkolk. Now, if you like what you've heard so far, then I'd like you to reach out. You can email me directly, timothy@findapodcastabout.xyz. Or you can leave me a voicemail on the website, findapodcastabout.xyz. I want to help you find your next binge-worthy podcast. And if you want me to find you a podcast in any category that you're interested in, well, then let me know. Now, if you're a podcaster and feel that your podcast would be served by appearing on the show, I want to talk with you. Use the same methods of reaching out. I'm on Twitter at @FindAPodcast, Instagram and Facebook at @FindAPodcastAbout. Another thing, if I'd like to ask, is if you found value in this podcast, pass it along to a friend. Lastly, doing this podcast is a labor of love, but love ain't cheap. So consider donating to my Buy Me a Coffee fund right on the website, or go to buymeacoffee.com/findapodcastabout. It takes about 5 to 7 hours of research and about 2 or 3 hours of production time per episode. That's 10 hours. And that, my friends, is a lot of coffee. Like I said earlier, the best recommendations come from a real, live, caffeinated person. Let's outsmart the algorithm together, shall we? All right, you made it to the third half of the show, where I turn you from a listener of this show into a binger of Love and Radio. Not many shows can boast of interviewing Black feminist thoughts, but here's one.
So what do they want from you in the way of services?
They want to touch my feet.
Are they small?
So good.
Want to be put in panties. Let's try the stong first. I do some corporal punishment, lots of ass training, sometimes some double dom stuff. You like being fucked? By anyone? Oh, yeah. They want to be called a bitch, or be my bitch specifically. You like to be this little slut, don't you? That's why I call you, what do I call you? Candy? Candy? I call people slave. They love that word.
So I knew of this type of thing, but it usually doesn't come across my newsfeed through the various channels that I listen to. Nor can many podcasts boast that they have interviewed a Jewish lawyer who defends Palestinian terrorists, as we're going to hear in this clip.
I just said, well, who is this guy? And the person said, Musa Abu Marzouk. And I said, that's nice. I said, the name at the time meant nothing to me. I said, just, trying to be cordial and polite. Who's Musa Abu Marzouk? So the caller said, well, he's the head of Hamas. I went, okay. So what happened here?
For years, Musa Abu Marzouk has been one of Hamas's key fundraisers, paymasters, and political strategists. He has the detachment and demeanor of a political spokesman who chose long ago not to notice the blood on his hands.
For me, this was an eye-opening interview, and one of my favorites from the whole podcast catalog of Love and Radio. I mean, think about it. A Jewish lawyer defending Palestinian terrorists. What? Where are you going to hear stories like this? Email me, let me know, because this is stuff that you don't hear about. And obviously, there's people out here doing this kind of stuff, and there is some media directed at them, but not a lot. And we're not hearing these stories. We're not privy to these stories. Last clip I'm going to play for you here is about a woman defending men in family court cases. Let's take a listen.
When did you start making men's rights the sort of focus of your law practice?
Instantly. As soon as I started my firm in April 2001, I immediately did men's rights from the moment I opened the doors. And so that is a state of the law that is still a major problem. You as a female can get pregnant and not tell the father and kidnap the kid. Like, it's literal kidnapping if he knows about the kid. But if you don't tell him, or you put some other dude's name on the birth certificate, 'cause they do, then you can kidnap kids. Like, no problem, no questions asked, no repercussions. 10 years later, you can come back and say, I want 4 years of back child support. By the way, you have a kid. No one cares.
So as a cisgendered man, for me, it's refreshing to hear that somebody outside of the man camp thinks this way. Because usually the other side of the story is told, where men leave their families destitute. And I think most men that I know wouldn't do things like this. They wouldn't, leave their family destitute and do those bad things. And some men are given short shrift because they are simply men. And that's how society views us, that, it's our fault, that we're always the abusers, and that we're always the bad guy. And it's tough to get a fair kind of trial, a fair kind of decision. So it's interesting to note that there is a woman out there that is going to defend you. Now, does she like all the people that she defends? No, not at all. But she looks at it at a bigger picture of, not necessarily that it should be a 50-50 split, but that the contribution that men make to the whole family dynamic is valued, is recognized, and it is made important in the eyes of the law. So what ties all these stories together? So we have, a black feminist thought. We've got a Jewish lawyer defending Palestinians. We got a woman helping men out in family court. You're not hearing these stories in mainstream media. You're not even hearing it in B Street, a B media or C media. There's certain things that obviously certain stories you have to tell so that way you can sell advertiser space and keep going. But a podcaster, we can do this much cheaper and exercise more fluidity in your podcast and then in the, against the big guys. If you like hearing stories like this, you're not going to get it anywhere else. This is your podcast. Nick and his team tackle these topics like investigative journalists used to do at the big companies. But now the big companies don't do it because the sponsors won't pay for it. The sponsors will find it too controversial, so they won't do it. But he's doing it. It's the little guy or the podcast host that's left to tell these stories to the public. Nick and his team are the people that make this happen. So that's why you need to go out and support him. You may not like all the stories. Red Dot. That's a tough one for me to, I did that one. I am very hesitant to recommend it because of the impact that it had on me, but it's necessary and it needs to be out there. And, that's the thing that ties these all together. These are stories that are not being told, that are not being shared, and they need to be. And you need to be watching it. And you need, listening to it and watching it too if Nick decides to go video. All right, you've made it to the end of the episode. Congratulations to you. I want to thank you for taking a listen. And if you want to outsmart the algorithm and have me review a podcast, email me, timothy@findapodcastabout.xyz, or go to the website, findapodcastabout.xyz, where you can listen to all the other episodes and leave me a voicemail. I'm here to help you find your next binge-worthy podcast. Now, again, as I said earlier, if you enjoyed this episode, hey, share it with a friend. Heck, Share it with Nick so that way he knows he has people out there that love him. Reach out to me via email or my voicemail feature on the site. And I also run another podcast. It's called Create Art Podcast, where I help listeners tame their inner critic and create more than you consume. You can find that one at createartpodcast.com, and maybe you too will want to share what you're doing in your neck of the woods in the art world. I hope Love and Radio becomes your next favorite podcast. Feel free to let me know what you think and what your favorite episodes are. I'd love to feature it on the show. Until next time, I'm here to help you outsmart that algorithm and find that next binge-worthy podcast. I'll talk to you soon.